Hello and welcome to Mythmakers. Today I'm joined by, I'm going to start again because I forgot to introduce. Hello and welcome to Mythmakers, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. My name is Julia Golding. I'm an author, but I'm also director of the centre. And today I am joined by a good friend of the centre who is also one of our tutors on our Novel in the Year course, Claire O'Brien, who is an author as well as a creative writing teacher. So Claire, do you want to tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Okay, yes. So I've been writing for a long time, probably about 30 years. So I feel almost qualified to say I have a writing life. And I first published for children in 1996. I had a couple of small titles published, and then absolutely nothing for 13 years. But I kept writing and doing the day job and living my life. And then I went off and did a master's in creative writing in Lancaster, up near the wonderful Lake District. And I, at that time, was not writing for children. I was actually working on a crime novel, which did get me an agent, but that didn't work out. We didn't get that one placed. And it was another 7 years before I realized that actually, with a background in primary school teaching and having read thousands of children's books, really I was best placed to write for children. So I went back to that, and it was the Scooby Undiscovered Voices anthology that picked up my the opening for my Cordelia Codd novels, which are funny novels about a girl just starting secondary school, so she's 11, 12, 13 in the novels, and having all the issues and a dysfunctional family, and parents who split up, and she has to get them back together again. And her place she goes to is vintage films and costumes. She wants to be a costume designer. And I have a great love of fabrics and sewing and costumes, so I had fun with that. So that was picked up by Orchard, who are part of Hachette, and there are 3 Cordelia Codd novels. And then since then, I've had a range of commissions for funny stories, mostly with educational publishers, and reworkings of traditional stories and fairy tales. I think probably my favourite of those was my reworking of Pinocchio, which got me interested in reworking fairy tales. And those are mostly the kind of things I do now, are commissions for educational publishers, anywhere from 5 years to up to older teens. I'll tackle, really.
Yeah, so this is an important part of the publishing world that people may not be familiar with, but certainly it provides the bread and butter to a lot of writers for younger children getting into the educational market. And what we wanted to talk about today as a theme, which has wider application, is the reworking of fairy tales. And just before we go there, listening to you talk, Claire, it seems as though there's some fairy tale tropes in your story, particularly the thing about the long wait for success, which is often in there in fairy tales. You know, you have to first spin this room full of straw into gold. You know, there's all that impossible tasks, and sometimes making a breakthrough in publishing or writing of any sort feels like a fairy tale task. So people can be encouraged, I think, by listening to your story. So
I hope so. Keep going. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So you understand that you've got a current project working on the fairy tales of Madame, now let me get this right, Madame de Aulnoy, is that how you say her?
Daunois, I think, is a pronunciation.
Daunois. Okay,
yes.
So that's D'Aulnoy. So first of all, let me ask, why do we not have her as a household name like Hans Christian Andersen or the Brothers Grimm?
Oh, hear me sigh. I know, really. I mean, I became interested in her after reworking Pinocchio, because Pinocchio is a story we know the original of. We know who wrote it. It was written by Carlo Collodi in the 1800s, and we have his, his original. And so much. I mean, Pinocchio is the most reworked of all the fairy tales, I think. And there is so much in that story that people have forgotten or don't know. And in my reworking of Pinocchio, I tried to put back in as many of the magical events and things as I possibly could fit in. It's like, who remembers the blue-haired fairy who rescues Pinocchio from the animal tricksters and sends her coachman, who is a poodle wearing velvet breeches, who drives a carriage made of whipped cream and biscuits? That isn't in the Disney movie, is it?
No.
So, and I thought, well, if this has gone missing, what else have we lost? What else are children not getting? What else have they been deprived of? And so I started to search around for more fairy tales, and I came across Madame Donois, and she was one of quite a group of women writing fairy stories in the 17th century and having them published and having them translated into English. She had a very successful salon in Paris after a very scandalous life, which in itself is like a fairy tale. And so she was published sort of 1692, 93. There were other women writing and publishing these sort of magical tales with a moral imperative in them at the time. And she was also at the same time as Charles Perrault, who many people know about him and associate him with French fairy tales. Now, in about 1720, after she had died, a huge collection of fairy tales was made called the Cabinet des Fées. And in that collection, something like 70% of the authors were women. And but when you get to the next century, was it the 1830s or something, where the Grimm brothers were collecting, their agenda, their brief, if you like, was to collect stories that helped to solidify a sense of German identity, because Germany was like sort of a new country. And I think that, this is purely my hypothesis, but I think that Madame Donois and many of her contemporaries, her stories were so soaked in French culture that they perhaps didn't fit the bill. So that may be one reason. There's also the fact that she was a woman and would not have been taken seriously. Charles Perrault was a big mover and shaker in the Académie Française, which was the sort of, and still is, the arbiter of what is culturally, what is high culture and what is not, if you like, or what is, it's the judge of those things. And so he was in a position to have his work to the fore, and of course he was a man, so there may be many reasons, really, but she was very popular in England for a while, but it's a mystery to me, and I think there must be scholars somewhere. There are a lot, she is known in academic circles, and I hope there are scholars somewhere who can unravel that mystery, because her work, the imaginative flights and the wonderful creatures that she conjures, many of which were brought from 15th and 16th century Italian tales, which would have been known, and then she's given them her own spin. But they are so much stronger and more interesting than anything I have read in Charles Perrault. She was just better.
Excellent. So have any of her tales survived that people might be aware of? And then we'll talk about the gems that got lost.
Yes, I think the White Cat is still quite well known. And I think
How does that story go?
Well, it's roughly, a king does not want to give up his throne. He doesn't want to retire, and he has 3 sons. And so he kind of makes tasks for them to do, sort of impossible tasks he sends them on. And one is they must bring him the most beautiful dog. in the world, the one who brings him the most beautiful dog in a year, go away for a year, bring me the most beautiful dog, and whoever brings me that will inherit my my lands and my castles. So the brothers go out. The two older brothers think that the younger one is, you know, he's not in the running, he's not really very bright, he's not going to make it. And they all go off on their quests. And of course, the youngest brother, he's wandering the forest and comes across an incredible jewel-encrusted palace where there is wealth beyond anything he's ever seen. And there are disembodied hands that guide him through the halls. And the entire palace is populated by cats. And the head of this household is this beautiful white cat. And he stays with her. Her hospitality is marvelous. And of course, time has no meaning in this sort of fairyland. And he's away for almost a year. And they find each other's company charming. And there are lovely scenes of feasting and music that are almost trippy and psychedelic. They are so beautiful, you know, plates of food tumbling and spinning, and it's just marvelous. And everything is very, you know, opulent and jewel encrusted. And so he promises he will come back, but he has to go. He's supposed to deliver a dog. So he's got to find a dog for his father. And of course, the white cat gives him the tiniest little dog that's inside something like a nutshell or something. It's impossibly small, impossibly cute. And so he goes back home, and of course he's won that challenge. So the father sets them 2 subsequent challenges, and each time he goes back and he stays with the white cat. And he's sort of falling in love with her, but she's a cat. And the final task is to bring the beautiful woman back. And he comes back with, only she's transformed.
I'm sorry, you cut out there. Can you go back to he came back with?
So she comes back with him, and of course her curse is broken, and it is revealed that she's the most beautiful princess.
Of course,
and all ends happily. So there's you know, very familiar tropes in it, but it's the imagination, that the things that she conjures, the events are really quite surreal and quite psychedelic in places. Wonderful.
I haven't actually heard that story before. It sounds wonderful. So I'm very excited to find out which ones no longer are anthologized and that you feel need to be, well, presumably what you're doing is rediscovering them for us.
Yes, I think, I mean, as I say, they're known in academic circles. And quite recently, the wonderful Professor Jack Zipes did translate a few, very much for adults. And they were written for adults. They were, you know, court entertainments. I suppose my mission that I set myself is to rework them for child readers. You know, I'm talking about the sort of the 6 to 9 age group. In today's world. And I can see that, I mean, there are about 24 that I've found. And I think you on first reading, and the only full translations I've found of them are in rather sort of cheaply done editions, you know, print on demand things, and they are they only go back to about 1892. You know, I don't think there's been a full translation of them since then. So we're rather desperately in need of someone to do this, I think. So where was I about?
So which ones have you picked out for your, because obviously there's a lot of them.
Okay. There are a lot of them. So some of them are longer, like the White Cat, and they I think they could be reworked either for young adults or for children. But I've picked out the ones that I feel a lot of the twinkle and the jewels and the aristocracy could be stripped away. It's not necessary that the characters are princes and princesses. It's not necessary that they're all on that cusp of falling in love, you know, at 15 or 16. And I've moved them to be ordinary children prepubescent children in usually having a hard time, because I just don't feel that it's necessary to have a lot of that princessy stuff. And what I've hung on to is the wonderful magical creatures and the happenings that go on. One of my favorites is, I think her name is Babiole, I think she's called. She is cursed to be turned into a monkey because her mother, when she's expecting, accidentally steps on the toe of a fairy and doesn't apologize. And fairies are very vengeful and easily upset. So poor Babiole is turned into a monkey. She's then taken away from her parents because the authorities say you cannot keep a monkey in your house. That monkey must go to the equivalent of the zoo or be sold to a circus or something. So the child is taken away. She's taken away in a box, but the person who takes her away thinks he likes the box. He'll keep the box and he throws away the monkey. So Babiole is set loose to try and find her way, her fortune in the world. And along the way, one of the magical objects that she's given by the fairy who helps her is a walnut. And at one point she's in the desert and thinks she's going to die. And she cracks open the walnut, and out of the walnut comes an enormous hot air balloon with a basket-shaped walnut, a walnut-shaped basket underneath. And she's, so she's rescued in that way. There's a lot of things coming out of tiny things, out of seeds and nutshells, huge, like whole orchestras are conjured out of a tiny nutshell. I love that about Dornois, that the way she plays with space and time are really quite mind-bending and wonderful. There's and also a beautiful tale of a girl who is very good at baking, and she's kidnapped by a sort of lioness woman, sort of half lion, half woman, taken to this very deep cave. And the lion says, "You must bake me fly cakes. I don't want anything but fly cakes. And if you don't, I will eat you." And she thinks, where am I going to get the flies? How am I going to bake the cakes? She's got the flour, she's got the sugar, everything. But where's she going to get flies? Down here. And as would happen, she rescues a frog from the beak of a raven who's about to eat the frog. And of course, when animals are helped, they always repay their kindness in fairy tales.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So the frog summons all the other frogs who are trapped in this subterranean place, and they roll themselves in the sugar and attract all the flies that she needs to make the cake. So there's just beautiful little touches like that. And in the same cave, there's a lake with a crocodile in, who was once a very wicked king, and he's been condemned to live underground as a crocodile until he mends his ways. Whether he does at the end or not, we shall see. So I've taken these and I've made them into about 6 stories that will be chapter books for kind of 6 to 8, 6 to 9-year-olds, something like that, because I feel that sort of wacky, quirky humor and imagination these days fits that age range really well.
Yeah.
They love that sort of stuff. I think it can be worked up for adults as well, but I feel that in the young adult and the adult reworking of fairy tales, so much has been done. And the younger age range has been rather neglected, and they're left with a very saccharine offering of rainbows and fairies with sequiny wings and that sort of thing. And I feel that children deserve better. They're smarter than that.
So just this raises the larger question for me about reworkings of fairy tales. I think we went through a bit of a pinch point where our understanding of what a fairy tale world was mediated through the 19th century Red Book of Fairies, Blue Book, those books, the Andrew Lang. Yeah, but also very much dependent on Grimm and Hans Christian Andersen. With I don't know if we call them exactly fairy tales, but Aesop's fables are kind of allowed in as the animal tales. So that is what follow me here, that's what the 20th century picked up for the sort of Disney films.
Yes.
So we've got things that have become archetypal. We've got Little Red Riding Hood, we've got Little Mermaid, we've got Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, and these are the things which keep getting reworked. I've noticed that recently the sort of DreamWorks, Pixar type people are moving into new kinds of stories, but they're no longer going, so Moana or Inside Out, they're doing different kinds of stories and the new fairy tales for our time, I suppose, or adventure tales. But I was just wondering if, in fact, that pinch point means that we have, as you said, we've missed out a whole kind of broader sense of imagination from the past that could enrich and rejuvenate what we think is familiar.
Absolutely, that's it. Yes, that's it in a nutshell. I mean, I think it's great that animation companies and book publishers are they're looking to other cultures for inspiration, and that's great, because again, there's a whole huge range of stories that the European, if you like, the European audience, we've missed out on those. And actually, I think kids love those. I think it should all be in the mix, definitely. But I think, as you say, we've also missed out on, like, Disney sort of skimmed the top, if you like. It skimmed the top of the milk and took a few well-known fairy tales and made them into brands, enormous brands. And we need to go back and dig a bit deeper into what we left behind, definitely. Because if I can find, and I'm not a scholar, but if I can find Madame Donois and her contemporaries, and Madame Donois, by the way, was the person who gave us the name Fairytales. Conte de Fées was her, what she gave, she gave us that. So if I can find those, then there must be many, many more. There must be many more, and they're so rich, and we've missed so much. And they were really quite proto-feminist as well, her stories. That's another point that I think is important. She had a very unhappy marriage. There were a lot of abusive and arranged and forced marriages at the time, and there are there are many sort of cruel fathers who marry off daughters in her tales, and husbands who are beasts, and idyllic places where there are only women, and women, and it's all very civilized, and no one goes to war. And so she was very proto-feminist. So we've missed out on all that as well. And I can't help thinking, if when I was a child, when you were a child, and our grandparents, if these stories had been part of our canon as much as Red Riding Hood and Sleeping Beauty are, I think we would think differently, because we would have a different vocabulary of imagination. And I really believe, and Jack Zipes said once that perhaps when society changes, we would change the stories we tell. But I think it's the other way around. If we change the stories that we tell to our children, we will change society. They will change society. And so it's very important to dig deep and not leave anything behind, either in terms of ideas or in terms of just imaginative works. It all needs to be in the mix there for our generation and future generations to draw on and make more of and rework.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you see any, let's think about things people already know, of all the retellings that have made into film and elsewhere, are ones where you think they really hit it well and ones where they did a real swing and a miss?
Oh my goodness, that's a huge question.
You're allowed to insult a couple of things. I'm sure they're big enough properties to survive.
Well, I mean, it's like, I suppose I couldn't judge in terms of being accurate for the book, probably, to the book, probably, or to the tale, probably not so many, but there are those that were quite true to the spirit of a story. And I suppose I'm thinking about, I mean, would you count in that, would you count something like Hook as a version of Peter Pan? Would I be able to count that in?
Yeah, I think so.
That's a more recent tale, but I think that captured something of the spirit. I quite liked that. And I mean, when, you know, even though Disney missed out a lot, I do think that some of the things, like their version of Pinocchio, it did capture the spirit of the boy who needed to change and reform. But there was so much more that could have been offered.
I think the most problematic for me in terms of what it didn't actually admit to is The Little Mermaid.
Yeah.
Because that's a very grim tale.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's not a grim tale, it's by Hans Christian Andersen. But
exactly.
There's a warning in that tale, because she ends up as the foam of the sea, doesn't she? Sorry, people who wanted to
oops.
Yeah. It's not so fairy tales are not they lived happily ever after. So this thing in common speech of fairy tale ending, actually quite a few fairy tales end in a very macabre way.
They do.
Sometimes they triumph for that, sometimes they don't. And I think that particularly when you add up the elements of The Little Mermaid, the ending that it gets in sort of a Disney version sort of muffles the questions about giving up all that for somebody else.
This is something about protecting children from the harsh side of life, isn't it? I think, and you know, one of Madame Donois' tales, the you know, the prince and princess cannot get together at the end, and they become I think they become birds. Some will become birds, and there are others where they become trees together. So there are times when, if you like, you know, the love or the happy ending that we would want is not possible. And there's a melancholy there, but it's also a way of showing that things don't always work out as we perhaps would wish. But it's okay. Sometimes it's okay, as long as there's hope. As long as there's some hope at the end.
Yes.
And, you know, sacrifice is kind of, that's okay too. And I think sometimes we cushion children a little too much, I think. And they're capable of such deep thought at such an early age, and you know, considering the big questions and thinking about, you know, death and loss and things like that. And it's quite important that we don't cushion them too much, because we compromise their resilience. You know, they do need to, and this is one of the things that tales can do, is find gentle ways of helping them build resilience.
Well, not just children, also adults. You know, you know, in romance novels, which is a lot of us read knowing that it's a fantasy, but it does potentially mean that you have unrealistic expectations of real relationships. You know.
Yes, absolutely.
So adults also need to have this corrective that doesn't always work out, and because that is life. So you said you really enjoyed reworking Pinocchio. That was your favorite tale to rework.
I did love that. Yes.
I reworked The Nutcracker.
Oh wow!
For a reading scheme like this, and I thought that was, so I went back to the Hoffman original tale, and it's so brilliant. It's so spooky. Of course, because most of us know it from a ballet these days, and a ballet works by doing set piece dances, and it loses the sense of menace and also the time period within it that you get in the original tale. And I thought that the godfather figure is so malevolent. Like he's like that was a bad fairy. He's like or is he? He's sitting on this. It's where the other is really powerful, because he's other. So I really enjoyed reworking that, because I'd stopped my knowledge of the Nutcracker as it's a Christmas ballet. But it's far more than that. It's about being believed. When we're sticking to your gun, saying, I saw this is true. A bit like Lucy coming out of Narnia. It has that dilemma in it for the main character. So
Yes.
No, it's a wonderful tale. I really enjoyed it. So if
Yeah.
you're listening to this as a want to be fantasy writer, one of the places to find inspiration is to go further back.
Yes, to go further back, absolutely. Dig deeply into those the tales that have been forgotten, that you will stumble across. Oh, sorry. Oh, that you will stumble across accidentally.
Yeah. So Claire, do you think that rewritings will ever fall out of favor? Are we over fairy tales?
Well, I don't think we'll ever be over them, but I think they do need refreshing, and we really don't need any more versions of Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty at the moment. I don't think, I'd say it's quite saturated. But I don't think, no, I don't think they'll ever fall out of favor, because people love magic and magical worlds, and if we stop having fairy tales, then our imaginations will wither a little, I think, won't they? And people need somewhere to go when they it's, I hesitate to use the word escapism, but of course it is a bit of escapism. But the truth is, when you escape to fairyland, you come back with something, don't you? You come back with some, it might be moral or ethical guidance, or some reassurance that all is well in the real world. I don't think so. I do think that we need to approach them perhaps differently. I feel that over the centuries, we know that fairy tales have been used as sort of moral guidance, sometimes as warnings, to try and influence either influence the behaviour of children, or to certainly in the case of Madame Dormois, to be able to satirise a little and laugh at some of the morals of the time and the inequalities of the time. And they're used, they're quite political with a small p in that way. But when you look at the sort of the happy ending, the prince and the princess, the sort of very aristocratic or the warrior-like qualities of fairy tale characters, the idea that there's a special person, or that magic can change things, can alter things. I think we're in a world that's post that now. I think we're in a world where we know that power is internal to the human being, and that we need to be resilient, as we've said, and confident. And many of the reworkings that I've seen that have kind of claimed to be perhaps feminist or modern or whatever, all they've done is they've kind of given the sword to the girl. That doesn't change the world. That just gives the girl permission to be like the men, to use violence or whatever. And that's quite a simplistic sort of way. Or like in the more recent Beauty and the Beast, it's lip service, really. I think her father is an inventor and she wants to be an inventor, and that's the token.
She wants to be an engineer.
Token, that's it. The token, gesture towards feminism. But I think, when you think about it, those tales, a lot of them are based on medieval chivalric codes, aren't they? And the ideas of honor and wooing princesses and the place of women. They're still very much based on that. And we haven't shifted from that. And so it's perhaps time for authors to become more people of philosophy. I'm sure many are, of course, but I think that it's about what sort of world do we want our children to build and to move into? And if we really want to help children and help them to shape the world, then we have to think about the stories that we're telling them. So we can use all the fairy tale vocabulary we've got, we can rework what we have, bring in from other cultures. But underlying that, what are the values that we're now promoting, if you like? And I feel that we need something that is broadly humanitarian and generally secular, so that we can include everybody. And so I think we really need to be thinking quite hard about what am I actually saying is a good way to live here? And one of the things I've done in my tales is that magic does not happen until the inner transformation has been undergone by the main character. So, and that's why I love Pinocchio so much, because Pinocchio does not become a human boy until he has changed, and then the magic happens. So we create our own magic. And I think that is what I'm trying to put across in my retellings. And I feel that, you know, maybe this is a bit egotistical, but I feel that's the way that fairy tales need to go. We need to think about what kind of world do we want to shape? What kind of adults do we want our children to develop into, who are going to reshape the world? And I hope most of us want a world where there is greater equality, where there is tolerance, where there is resilience, where there is no war, where conflict is resolved through dialogue and understanding. And there will always be, you know, the dark forces of evil. There will always be the malevolent fairies. There will always be the push back against that sort of desire. And, you know, so there's lots of scope. You know, they won't all become wishy-washy. There will still be lots of action and lots of need for, you know.
I think I disagree with you partly there, because you said that they need to be secular. I don't agree at all. I think we need to be diverse. Yes. So that I'd be very excited to read a fairy tale coming out of the Islamic world, or the Buddhist world, or the Hindu world, or the Jewish world. I don't think it has to be secular, because secular is a choice of a certain kind of mindset. And the vast majority of the world, people have a whole range of faiths. And all the Inklings, of course, were Christians, and they wrote fairy tales too. So I don't agree there. I think the important thing is, and also I'd be wary about coding in messages. I think that children need to have the discussion so they can reject Beauty and the Beast. Say, hang on a minute, isn't he basically incarcerating a female? You know? Yes. I think it's quite good that to have the discussion around a fairy tale. I think the stuff it's good to be in the fairy tale and then have the discussion. So I think I would think more about the discussion that follows on, rather than the sort of coding it in advance.
And if you're this is great. I like to prompt, you know, debate.
And if you're retelling Beauty and the Beast now, you can put some pointers in there where it does feel uncomfortable, so somebody can say, hang on, really, what's going on here? Even at a young age, though, I find that arrangement unfair and monstrous.
And I think that's true. If children are also equipped with you know, a critical being, you know, with you know, with the ability and the permission to question things, you know that you know, question what you're reading, question what you're seeing. I think as long as we're also equipping children with that skill and that permission, if you like, or that confidence.
Yeah, because I mean, there is a movement at the moment, I mean, particularly as I understand in parts of America, to take books out of a library. And you look at the content of what the books they're taking out, and you think, why are you taking that out? Why don't you just make sure there is a range of books that present another view? So that child can say, well, I didn't agree with that one, but I did agree with this one. I think this fear that children are somehow going to be so blank that they don't analyze what they're reading is false. I mean, obviously very, very young children, you wouldn't want to terrify them or anything. But as they get older, I think it's unless there is something really outrageous in a book, I think leave it on the shelf and have the discussion.
No, and when I say secular, I don't mean you know, devoid of you know,
because you get rid of the Arabian Nights if you say secular.
No, I mean, I mean, to me that's kind of the tales of different cultures are almost like a whole other wave of things that, yes, of course, we must have.
There's nothing wrong with people writing secular tales like, you know, the Philip Pullmans of this world. Absolutely. Put those in there. The Firework Maker's Daughter, fabulous Philip Pullman story. It's just my plea is that we don't think that we need to tidy everything up and make a lovely little garden, safe garden for children to go in. I think actually books should be a little bit dangerous, should have a bit, because that's safer to experience and question some of these things in a book than it is to go and try these things out in real life. Your Psychedelic Feast sounds great to read about, but maybe maybe actually in real life might be a bit dangerous. Anyway, so I know you said you weren't keen on another retelling of Cinderella, but as a final place to go, I thought
it will happen.
Yeah, I thought that we could actually decide where in all the fantasy worlds, in all the retellings and hidden versions of Cinderella is the best place to be Cinderella. And it can be a male Cinderella. What we're picking up here is a rags to riches story where there is some sort of wicked stepmothery type figure keeping them down, and some sort of miraculous, the shoe moment where they're recognized. So where do you think it can be a straightforward Cinderella, but there's been lots of them.
I mean, a fairly straightforward Cinderella. I mean, that you know, it's like there isn't a good place to start off being Cinderella, is there? You know, oppression is oppression. I think I would want to put her in a fairy tale world where if things don't work out with the prince or princess, you know, if it's a, you know, or prince and prince or whatever, you know, if things don't work out in this fairy tale marriage, she will be okay. She will be able to find purpose and feel strong and be independent. That's where I would put her. She has to have other choices, I think.
Yeah. There's just for those of you who are also watching Bridgerton, there is a Cinderella story coming up in Benedict Bridgerton. His love interest is Sophie, who is a Cinderella figure. Absolutely. So I think in terms of you get to be in the Bridgerton world at the same time as being in a fairy tale world, that's my pick. I think it's called An Offer from a Gentleman. So it is fairly traditional, but you get a Bridgerton. So what's not to like?
Frocks. You get great frocks.
But it's actually, to be fair to Julia Quinn, it's actually one of her really interesting ones, though it is very closely wedded to the Cinderella story. But she does allow one of the ugly sisters to escape. You know, the ugly sisters people. Yeah, they don't have to stay an ugly sister. They can move over to be a salvageable character. So yeah, that's my pick. An Offer from a Gentleman, Julia Quinn, Bridgerton. It'd be interesting to see what they do with that one, because it's so clearly Cinderella. I've got a feeling Shonda Rhimes and co will struggle with that one, but we'll see. That's probably the season after next. Yeah. Anyway, you get Benedict Bridgerton is already in the season. He's the one who's the artist, so he's already a bit bohemian. So he's being set up to be suitable for marrying a servant. Who secretly, of course, is aristocratic, going back to your point about, you know, fairy tales rather overdoing the nobility thing. Okay, well, thank you so much. That has been fun to discuss, and I really look forward to reading some of your retellings.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, Julia.
Thank you, Claire.